Right, so there I was, sitting on 40 million pounds. Yes, you heard correctly, 40 million, whilst my darling offspring treated me like some sort of professional vagrant. Brilliant family dynamics, really. Nothing says loving children quite like being compared unfavorably to a BMW driving stepfather whilst you're trying to serve them homemade meatloaf. But I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? The evening started promisingly enough. My daughter Lindsay pulled up in her sleek sedan, naturally, and immediately began critiquing my transport arrangements with all the subtlety of a documentary about industrial accidents. "God, what a rust bucket," she sneered, eyeing my 1998 Chevrolet Malibu like it had personally insulted her ancestors. The evening light caught the fresh scratches on the passenger door, battle scars from the used car lot where I'd bought it that morning. Because nothing says celebrating a new purchase quite like your own children providing a running commentary on your life choices. Charlie emerged from the driver's side, shaking his head with the sort of theatrical disappointment usually reserved for failed soufflés. "You're such a beggar, Dad. Our stepdad just got a new BMW. Silver leather seats, the works, and you're out here celebrating this." Yes, the stepfather comparison. Because clearly, the measure of a man's worth is directly proportional to his vehicle's leather appointments and price tag. How wonderfully enlightened of them. I forced what I hoped was a pleasant smile, wiping my hands on the kitchen towel I'd been holding. "Come on in, kids. Dinner's ready. I made your favorite, meatloaf and mashed potatoes." "Meatloaf?" Lindsay's voice could have stripped paint. "When was the last time you had a decent meal? Richard took us to that new steakhouse downtown last week. 100-pound steaks, imported wine." Right? Because nothing says family bonding quite like using expensive dining experiences as emotional weaponry. I do so love it when my children treat conversations like competitive sport. They followed me into the small kitchen where I'd set the table with my best plates, the ones their mother had graciously left behind after the divorce, along with her wedding vows and any semblance of loyalty. The overhead light cast harsh shadows across the worn linoleum, making everything look rather smaller and shabbier than usual. Marvelous ambience for what was shaping up to be a delightful family gathering. "Sit down, please," I said, gesturing to the chairs with what I hoped was paternal authority rather than desperate pleading. "I thought we could celebrate together." Charlie slumped into his seat like he was doing me the most tremendous favor. "Celebrate what exactly? That beater outside? Dad, it's embarrassing. My friends see me getting out of that thing." "Your friends don't matter," I replied, serving the meatloaf with hands that were admirably steady, considering. "What matters is that it's reliable transportation." Lindsay laughed, a sharp, cutting sound that could have opened letters. "Reliable? It looks like it's held together with prayers and duct tape. Richard's planning to buy me a new Mercedes for my birthday." "A Mercedes, Dad? Not some junkyard special." The fork trembled slightly in my hand. Just slightly. I set it down, watching them pick at their food with all the enthusiasm of prisoners on death row. How delightfully appreciative. "You know," Charlie continued, because apparently we weren't quite at rock bottom yet, "it's hard to explain to people why our dad lives like this when our stepdad—" "Your stepdad isn't your father," I interrupted, my voice sharper than intended. "Because sometimes stating the obvious becomes a revolutionary act." "No, but he acts like one," Lindsay shot back with the precision of a trained sniper. "He provides for us. He cares about our image, our future. Look at this place, Dad. When was the last time you bought new furniture or fixed that leaky faucet?" I glanced around the kitchen at the slightly sagging cabinets, the mismatched chairs, the ancient refrigerator humming away in the corner like a geriatric pensioner. Everything was clean and functional, but admittedly showing its age. Rather like myself, come to think of it. During the divorce, I'd moved into this rental house whilst they stayed in our family home with their mother and Richard, the knight in shining BMW armor. "I live within my means," I said carefully, each word measured. "There's value in that." "Value?" Charlie nearly choked on his potatoes. "Dad, you work at the hardware store? You drive a car that's older than my university degree. What kind of example is that?" The words hit like physical blows, each one carefully aimed at precisely the right spots to cause maximum damage. 30 years at that hardware store, working my way up from stock boy to assistant manager. I'd put them both through university, never missed a birthday or graduation. When their mother left me for Richard, a successful contractor with money and flash and all the social graces I apparently lacked, they'd chosen sides without so much as a moment's hesitation. "I've always provided for you," I said quietly. "University tuition, car payments, that summer in Europe for Lindsay. That was years ago, Dad." Lindsay waved dismissively, as if my decades of sacrifice were some sort of quaint historical footnote. "Richard's been supporting us since Mum married him. He bought Charlie that flat, helped with my wedding." "Wedding you didn't invite me to," I muttered, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. "Because you would have shown up in some thrift store suit, probably driven that monstrosity." Charlie gestured toward the window with theatrical disgust. "We couldn't have that embarrassment." And there it was. The final straw, delivered with all the casual cruelty that only family can truly master. Something snapped inside me, the careful patience I'd cultivated over years of their dismissiveness, their casual cruelty, their complete disregard for everything I'd sacrificed for them. It cracked like ice in spring. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Get out." They stared at me, forks halfway to their mouths, looking rather like startled fish. I said, "Get out. Now." "Dad," Lindsay started, but I wasn't having it. "Don't." My voice carried a finality that surprised even me. "Just leave. Take your opinions about my car, my house, my life, and get out." Charlie stood slowly, his face flushed with anger and surprise. Because how dare the family failure develop a backbone at this late stage? "Fine. But don't come crying to us when you need help." "I won't," I said, following them to the door. "Trust me on that." They gathered their things in stunned silence, the sort of quiet that follows explosions. Lindsay paused at the threshold, her expression a mixture of shock and wounded pride, as if she couldn't quite believe her doormat of a father had suddenly developed the audacity to stand up. "You're making a mistake, Dad. We're the only family you have left." I watched them climb into their expensive car, the engine purring to life with the quiet efficiency of German engineering. The taillights disappeared around the corner, leaving me alone with the echo of their words and the weight of 30 years of accumulated resentment. After they drove off into the night, I locked the door and sank into my chair. The house felt different now, charged with the electricity of burned bridges. I pulled out my laptop and navigated to the familiar website, entering the passwords I'd memorized years ago. The screen loaded slowly, then displayed numbers that would have shocked my children into blessed silence. £40,248,891.32. £40 million, built stock by stock, investment by investment, over 40 years of careful planning. It started with my first paycheck from the copper mines when I was 22. Instead of spending it on beer and entertainment like my colleagues, because apparently I was boring even then, I bought 5 shares of IBM, then 10 shares of Coca-Cola, then more. Always more. Reinvesting dividends and adding whatever I could spare. I remembered those early years vividly, working double shifts at the mine, coming home covered in dust and exhaustion, only to spend hours researching companies, reading financial reports by lamplight. My first wife thought I was obsessed, but I knew I was building something important. Something that would matter. When the mining industry collapsed, I'd already diversified. Whilst my neighbors lost their jobs and their futures, I quietly transitioned to the hardware store and continued investing. Apple at £12 a share, Microsoft at 8, Amazon at 18. Companies that seemed risky then but felt inevitable to me. The secret had been my burden and my test. I'd wanted to see who truly loved me, who would stand by me when I appeared to have nothing. Their mother had failed that test spectacularly, leaving me for Richard's flashy success. Now my children had failed it too, calling me a beggar whilst sitting on a fortune that dwarfed their stepfather's modest construction business. I'd planned to leave it all to them. Every share, every dividend, every carefully cultivated pound. But sitting in my kitchen, remembering the disgust in their voices, I felt something shift inside me. They didn't deserve inheritance. They deserved education. I opened another browser window and began searching property records. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Charlie's flat where he paid £1,500 a month in rent. Lindsay's duplex where she and her husband lived for £1,200 monthly. Both properties were owned by Mountain View Holdings, a small estate company that had been struggling since the pandemic. I smiled for the first time all evening. Tomorrow I would make some calls. Mountain View Holdings was about to receive an offer they couldn't refuse. "You want to see a beggar?" I murmured to the empty room. "Let me show you what real poverty looks like." Sunlight filtered through the curtains, pulling me from a fitful sleep filled with echoes of last night's barbs. I tossed and turned for hours, their voices replaying in my mind like a particularly vindictive broken record. Beggar. Embarrassment. Rust bucket. The anger had crystallized into something harder during the dark hours. Determination. I shuffled to the kitchen and fired up my old desktop computer, the fan whirring to life with familiar complaints. Rather like myself in the mornings, really. Whilst it loaded, I made coffee in the same chipped mug I'd used for 20 years, because apparently consistency is my forte. My brokerage account opened with its usual security prompts. I navigated to my holdings, scrolling through decades of careful selections. There, Microsoft purchased at £12, now worth over 400. Apple bought at 15, currently trading at 180. Beautiful, really, how patience pays off whilst children don't. I selected several positions, enough to generate the cash I'd need for the next phase. The confirmation screen appeared. "Are you sure you want to sell 50,000 shares of Microsoft Corporation?" I clicked confirm without hesitation, because sometimes the most important decisions are the easiest ones to make. The doorbell rang sharply, interrupting my thoughts. 8:30 in the morning. Who visits at this ungodly hour? I opened the door to find Patricia standing on my porch, her face flushed with anger, her expensive handbag clutched like a weapon. The ex-wife. Right on schedule. "How could you treat your own blood like that?" she demanded, pushing past me into the house with all the subtlety of an invading army. "Charlie called me last night, crying like a child. You threw them out. Your own children." I closed the door slowly, maintaining my composure with what I felt was admirable restraint. "They're adults now, Patricia. 30 and 27 years old. They need to learn respect." "Respect?" She whirled around, her voice rising like a soprano reaching for a high note. "You humiliated them. They were just trying to help you see reason about that ridiculous car purchase." "Help me see reason by calling me a beggar? By comparing me to your husband like I'm some sort of failure? You are a failure." The words exploded from her like champagne from a shaken bottle. "Look at this place, William. Look at your life. You're 62 years old, living in a rental, driving a car that belongs in a scrapyard. Our children are embarrassed by you." "Actions have consequences," I replied evenly, marveling at how calm I sounded when inside I was rather enjoying this. She stared at me, perhaps surprised by my response. "You've changed. You used to be reasonable, understanding. Now you're just cold." "I'm not cold, Patricia. I'm done being a doormat." "Don't you dare blame this on me," she snapped, because apparently we're having a full dramatic production this morning. "I tried to make our marriage work, but you were always buried in those ridiculous financial magazines, talking about companies nobody had ever heard of. Richard understands what it means to provide for a family." "Richard," I repeated softly, savoring the word. "The man you had an affair with whilst I was working double shifts to pay for Charlie's university fees." Her face went white. "Rather dramatically, actually. That's ancient history." "Is it? Because it seems like you're all still living in that same fantasy where I'm the villain and you're the victims." She stood there for a moment, speechless, a rare and beautiful thing. Then she straightened, gathered her dignity and her handbag, and headed for the door. "This isn't over, William. You've hurt your children for the last time." I watched her climb into her BMW, Richard's money, no doubt, and drive away. As her taillights disappeared, I couldn't help but think about the absurdity of it all. My 30-year-old son and 27-year-old daughter had run to their mummy like children denied sweets. Marvelous. Simply marvelous. The funds from the stock sale cleared 3 days later with digital efficiency. £20 million, sitting quietly in my current account like a particularly well-behaved house guest. I grabbed my keys and headed downtown to the small estate office wedged between a coffee shop and a pawn store, because apparently irony has a sense of humor. I'm interested in purchasing a flat building, I told the receptionist, a young woman with bright red hair who looked up from her computer with the expression of someone who's just been asked to explain quantum physics. That's a significant investment. Are you working with a specific agent? I'll work with whoever can close the deal quickly. 20 minutes later, I sat across from Janet Morrison, a middle-aged estate agent with tired eyes and the sort of weary professionalism that comes from years of dealing with property dreams and financial nightmares. Mountain View Holdings has been struggling since the pandemic, she explained, sliding a folder across the desk. They're motivated to sell, but they're asking £2.8 million for the building. I'll take it. No inspection. No questions. Her eyebrows shot up like startled birds. Don't you want to see the maintenance records? The rental history? I'm familiar with the property. I pulled out my checkbook. Yes, I still use checks because I'm apparently a living fossil. How quickly can we close? 2 hours of paperwork later, I owned Charlie's building. The same afternoon, I purchased Lindsay's duplex from Mrs. Chin, a widow who seemed positively delighted to offload what she described as nothing but headaches. By 5 o'clock, I owned both of my children's homes. Rather satisfying, really. I didn't waste time with subtlety. That evening, I composed emails to both property management companies with the sort of clinical precision I'd once reserved for stock analysis. As the new owner of 847 Granite Street, I'm implementing immediate rent increases. Unit 4 will increase from £1,500 to £4,500 monthly, effective next month. The second email was equally brief. For the duplex property, Unit B rent increases from £1,200 to £3,600 monthly. Same timeline. I hit send on both messages, then leaned back in my chair. Sometimes the most elegant solutions are also the most brutal. Janet Morrison rang within 2 hours, her voice carrying a note of concern that hadn't been there before. Mr. Simmons, I've delivered the notices as requested, but I have to tell you, the reactions were intense. Go on. The young man in Unit 4, Charlie, he completely lost it. Started screaming about robbery, slammed the door so hard I thought it might break. He's threatening to move out immediately. I made what I hoped was a sympathetic noise, though I was rather enjoying myself. And the young woman in the duplex, Janet continued, she broke down crying. Kept saying, "How can we afford this?" Over and over. Begged me to contact the owner, said she'd do anything to negotiate. Anything to negotiate. I remembered Lindsay's wedding shower, when I'd slipped her an envelope containing £5,000 for her honeymoon. She'd stuffed it in her handbag without opening it, too busy showing off her registry gifts to Richard's wealthy friends. These are fair market adjustments, I told Janet. If they can't afford the new rates, they're welcome to find housing elsewhere. But Mr. Simmons, tripling the rent overnight. They're adults. They'll figure it out. The phone calls began almost immediately. Unknown numbers, mostly silence when I answered. Then Charlie's voice, disguised but unmistakable. "You made a mistake, old man. We won't forget this." I listened calmly, then hung up. Let him rage into the void. The legal notice arrived by registered post, because apparently they'd escalated to proper threats now. Notice of intent to sue for emotional distress and abandonment of parental duties. Patricia's signature sprawled across the bottom alongside those of my children. I rang Frank Morrison, Janet's brother, who'd handled my property purchases with admirable discretion. "Sounds like harassment," he said after I'd read him the particulars. "Bring me the papers. I think you might want to consult with a private investigator I know. Detective Ray Sullivan, retired from the local force. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense. And sometimes the best revenge is letting people destroy themselves whilst you watch from a comfortable distance. Ray Sullivan was exactly what I'd expected. Weathered face, careful eyes, the sort of man who'd spent decades reading people's secrets like morning newspapers. "What are we looking for?" he asked, settling onto the park bench beside me. "My son Charlie works at Mountain States Insurance. I suspect he's been cutting corners, padding expense accounts, falsifying reports. His character suggests he'd take shortcuts if he thought he could get away with it." 2 weeks later, Sullivan's report arrived in a plain manila envelope. Charlie's employment file painted a picture of escalating dishonesty, fabricated mileage reports, inflated client dinner receipts, even claiming overtime for hours he'd never worked. The anonymous email I sent to Mountain States Insurance was brief and to the point. "Your employee, Charlie Simmons, has been systematically defrauding your company. Documentation attached." Within a week, Charlie was terminated for violation of company policies. The official reason was corporate speak, but the local gossip was more entertaining. "They caught him red-handed with fake receipts," Mrs. Henderson whispered over the garden fence. One down. Lindsay's real estate career required a more delicate touch. Ray's second report documented a pattern of client deceptions that would make any ethical agent cringe. Property valuations inflated by 20%, foundation cracks concealed with strategic furniture placement, water damage hidden behind fresh paint and creative staging. The anonymous posts I uploaded to 3 review sites were carefully crafted to appear organic, just a concerned citizen sharing documented evidence of fraud. The estate licensing board received formal complaints within days. Lindsay's office was empty within a week, a "for rent" sign in the window telling the story better than any news article could. 2 down. The bankruptcy filing notice arrived with Charlie's name typed in formal legal script. The hearing was scheduled for Friday. Both my children would be there, desperate and cornered. Perfect timing for the final act. I arrived early at the courthouse, settling into a back row seat to observe the proceedings. Charlie sat at the petitioner's table, his lawyer shuffling papers with the resigned air of someone managing an inevitable loss. Lindsay had come for moral support, glancing around anxiously as if expecting more bad news to materialize from the shadows. The judge reviewed the bankruptcy petition with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Simmons, you're claiming debts exceeding £150,000 with assets of less than £30,000? "Yes, Your Honor." "And your primary creditor is listed as unknown property owner for back rent?" This was my moment. I rose from my seat, documents in hand, feeling the weight of decades lift with each step toward the front of the courtroom. "Your Honor, I can clarify that matter." The room fell silent. Charlie's head snapped around, his eyes widening as recognition dawned. "I'm the landlord in question," I announced, my voice carrying clearly through the sudden hush, "and my accounts show £40 million in assets." Gasps rippled through the courtroom like a Mexican wave. Charlie's mouth opened and closed like a fish struggling for air. "This can't be," he stammered, half rising from his chair. I handed the court clerk my property deeds, bank statements, and eviction papers with the sort of calm satisfaction that comes from 30 years of patient planning finally bearing fruit. I own both properties where my children live. Given their continued harassment and threats, I'm requesting immediate eviction proceedings. The judge examined the documents with raised eyebrows. "Mr. Simmons, the elder Mr. Simmons, these appear to be in order. The bankruptcy filing becomes irrelevant if you're the primary creditor." "Dad!" Lindsay's voice cracked like a whip. "You can't do this to us." Petition denied. Immediate eviction granted. Court adjourned. The gavel fell with sharp finality. They followed me out of the courthouse, their earlier confidence replaced by desperate pleading. I kept walking, my back straight, my mind already turning to the quiet satisfaction of justice finally served. "Dad, wait!" Lindsay called out, her heels clicking frantically against the pavement. "Please, we need to talk." Without warning, they both dropped to their knees on the courthouse steps, their expensive clothes scraping against the rough stone. The public display drew stares from passing pedestrians, but they were beyond caring about appearances now. "We're begging you," Lindsay sobbed, her mascara streaming down her cheeks. "We'll change. We promise." Charlie's voice cracked as he spoke. We were wrong about everything. The car, the house, the way we talked to you. Please don't do this to us." Lindsay pulled out a small wooden heart I'd carved for her in primary school, holding it up like a peace offering. "Remember when you made this for me? You said it would always keep us connected." The heart in Lindsay's hand reminded me of all the sacrifices they'd dismissed, all the love they'd rejected in favor of their stepfather's flashier offerings. "It's too late for that," I said firmly, stepping back from their grasping hands. "You've shown your true colors. The money doesn't change what you are." "But we'll pay rent," Charlie pleaded. "We'll get jobs. We'll..." "No more." I turned away from them, their pleas fading like distant thunder as I walked toward my car. The eviction officers arrived precisely on schedule. Through intermediaries, I heard about their frantic packing, the neighbors gathering to watch the spectacle, the removal van filled with furniture they'd have to sell to pay for temporary housing. Their luxury cars were the first to go, repossessed when they couldn't make the payments. Designer clothes, expensive electronics, all the status symbols they'd once flaunted were sacrificed to pawn shops and online sales. Charlie ended up in a weekly rate motel on the outskirts of town. Lindsay couch-surfed between friends, each stay growing shorter as her welcome wore thin. Patricia rang one evening, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. "You've destroyed them, William. Are you satisfied now?" "I didn't destroy them," I replied calmly. "I simply stopped enabling their destruction of themselves. They're your children." "They stopped being my children the moment they chose contempt over love." She hung up without another word. I liquidated 30% of my portfolio, enough to fund the next chapter of my life whilst leaving the remainder to continue growing. The rental properties I kept, reletting them to tenants who would actually appreciate what they were getting. My own house sold within a week to a young family who saw potential rather than problems. The flight to California was surprisingly peaceful. As the mountains shrank below, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete freedom. The house in Carmel sat on a bluff overlooking the Pacific, its windows framing sunsets that painted the sky in colors I'd forgotten existed. At a community center lecture series, I met Eleanor, a widow who'd moved to the coast after her husband's death. "I raised 3 children," she told me one evening as we watched the waves crash below my deck. "They visit twice a year, beautiful but distant. I've learned that family isn't always about blood." "What is it about then?" "Respect. Kindness. The choice to see value in someone beyond what they can provide." My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, probably one of my children trying a new approach. I glanced at it, then deleted it without reading. The waves crashed in their eternal rhythm, and I realized I'd finally found what I'd been investing in all these years. Not just financial security, but the self-respect to walk away from toxicity and the wisdom to recognize genuine connection when it appeared. As the sun dipped below the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I felt a contentment I'd never known was possible. The future stretched ahead, unbound by the expectations of ungrateful children or the ghosts of past disappointments. I was free, and sometimes that's worth 40 million pounds of anyone's money.